All right, at the top of your sheet, I just want to again just kind of remind you of where we're at. A couple things. Chapter 14, when we're in chapter 14, is the 7 visions. I kind of reduced these down when we kind of look back. Chapter 14 is the 7 visions of reassurance that God wins. And so, even in talking about tonight, what we're talking about tonight, chapter 16, it's good to kind of think back to when God was showing John the bigger picture and why all these things are happening and how even though these things are happening and he's having to finally pour out his wrath on the evil of this world and judgment and all that kind of stuff, it's a part of his bigger picture. And if nothing else that we should have seen, and I would say I've even learned this new going through it this way, verse by verse in such small sections, we ought to see how hard the Lord is trying to bring people to repentance, all right? There is warning after warning after warning. There's signs that can lead them to go, ooh, don't want any of that. I've had enough of that. Turn or burn, that kind of stuff. There's been plenty of that, and that's just what we see, what happens after the rapture. The rapture alone is a wake-up call. If you think about it, you've got to be pretty stubborn to have everybody that you know, if this is the way in some people's lives, you have everybody that you know close enough to know that they were those church people. They were those ones that called themselves Christians or something, and they are the ones that are gone, and you're one of the ones that are left behind. You have to be pretty stubborn to not just say, wow, I should rethink this. And was that really true? And why are they the only ones gone? And do I believe the stories of what actually happened and all that? And so, again, we see God through all this constantly giving opportunity and pleading for people to repent and to turn, and yet so many don't, but some will. Okay, so chapter 4 was a reminder of the bigger picture of what kind of what's going on, not just the details of this time of tribulation. And then we went into, last week we had chapter 15, which if you weren't here, remember chapter 15 is the shortest chapter in Revelation. Only 8 verses. They're not all short verses, but only 8 verses. And yet it was pretty packed. I'm not quite sure why. I just gave you all the whole chapter 15. So you may have a question or two from 15, but basically 15 set the stage for chapter 16. And so it was the introduction of the 7 angels. Our 7 angels are all back right here. The exact same angels as last week? Or did we swap or trade angels like they're both? All right. So we used the illustration last week of the 7 angels. They got up there. They're introduced in chapter 15. They came out with their bowls. And then we put the brakes on again. So wait a minute. We're not quite ready. And so we've got to, we got to realize this is a process that is pouring out. We're right here, chapter 16. 15 announcing what's happening, 16 the actual event itself. If you'll take just a minute, I keep moving you around, but I just want to keep reminding us of the bigger picture. If you go back all the way to your first or second page of your book, it should be white, and it should be the very cover page, should say an outline of Revelation. And if you look at the outline of Revelation, that's how we started, just introducing the book. And when we introduced it, we talked about how chapter 1 stood by itself. It was a description of what had been, the resurrected Christ, who Christ was and everything. And then chapter 2 and 3, those first, the second and third chapter of Revelation, are the messages to the church. So it really dealt with the church age, the current age that we are in. And then at the close of chapter 3, the church is not mentioned anymore from 4 on. And that's because the church was raptured. So the rapture takes place as far as the outline of the book of Revelation. That rapture is not described or discussed. It takes place, but not discussed in Revelation. Took place after chapter 3 when it talked to the churches, and chapter 4. And so then, if you notice on the outline, then the last section, part 3 of Revelation, is the bulk of Revelation. It's chapter 4 all the way to the end, and that is the end times. That's what's in the future. Church age is what we are currently in. Church age is what John was currently in when he received the revelation. And so for 2,000 years, we've been in chapter 2, chapter 3, living that part out. with chapter 4 and following looming on us, all right? So now you look in your outline, in chapter 4 through chapter 22 is the bulk of Revelation, or the bulk of the outline is the future revelation of future things. And you see all the events that we've already gone through, chapter 4 and 5, the church's rapture, chapter 6 through 18 is the second section. So we have been, ever since chapter 6, and we still got 2 more chapters, 17 and 18, we're just in that one section of the outline, which is the 7-year tribulation and the reign of Antichrist. And so that's just a reminder of where we're at in the bigger picture of the breakdown of the book of Revelation. Once again, reminding ourselves that when John wrote it, he didn't write it with chapters. So he didn't have those chapter numbers, but as we divide it out, that's one way for us to kind of keep track of it. All right, so now we start chapter 16. Any questions before we start? Since I often run out of time, we don't give time for questions. I thought tonight we're only going to do 3 verses. 3 verses, that's awesome. And I thought there's not much there. I'll do a little talk, and then we'll just have time for questions and answers. And as we're working through it, no, there's still plenty to look at. So we're only going to try to cover 3 verses tonight, and so we're not going to even... I'm not going to give you the whole chapter and all 7 bowls of wrath and all that kind of stuff tonight. We're just going to do verses 1, 2, and 3. And I'm hoping for a little bit of time for questions, either along the way or at the end, either in regards to this or maybe even backing up and saying, okay, let me remind me. And by the way, I appreciate those questions that you kind of hold on to and then you think, well, this isn't what we talked about tonight or whatever, but I have another question or something. So I like those kind of things because it tells me you think through the whole process. Chapter 14 was the 7 visions. Chapter 15 was the preparation for chapter 16, or for this set of scriptures where the bowl judgments are poured out, and we looked at the outline of the whole book of Revelation. So chapter 16, verse 1. Here we go. Who would like the honors of reading verse 1? All right, Donnie, I saw your hand there first. Verse 1.
Then I heard a loud voice from the 2 of the saints and 7 angels, pour out the 7 bowls of God's wrath.
All right. One thing I find when I read through these scriptures and stuff, it is so easy to just kind of get lost in the whole thing, and as you're reading through there's just so much to it that you can almost look like a verse like that. No, that's just a lead-in verse to, what we talked about, the whole chapter 15 leading up to what's going to happen in 16. So let's get verse 1 out of the way, and let's start pouring out bowls of wrath, all right? And yet, as I look at it, verse 1 has plenty for us to just kind of take a deep breath and think about, all right? The voice came from where? From the temple. And what did it say? Go. So fill in your blank. The voice came and said, go. Who's supposed to be going? The angels. What angels? The angels we talked about in verse 15. So they were introduced there. We see them coming out of the temple, and they've been handed these bowls of wrath. And so they're in place, they're ready to do what they've been assigned to do, and then the voice, the command, the call goes out for these angels to go do what you're assigned to do. And that is to pour out the what? 7 bowls. 7 bowls, so fill in the blank 7. Pour out these 7 bowls of God's wrath. All right. So, a little, not friendly reminder, because this isn't very friendly, but a little reminder, clearly, the things that are about to take place are God's wrath, God's judgment. We've talked so much about what's going on here with the Antichrist, and we'll talk about it. We'll still talk about him and all that's going on. But what we see happening right here has nothing to do with, it doesn't have anything to do, but it's not the devil's doing. It's not what he's doing. It's not what the Antichrist is doing, the false prophet, or any of those kind of things. It's not the world government, the system. It's not all that kind of stuff. This is from heaven, God's wrath being poured out. So that's a little reminder, because we've seen a mixture of what God's doing, what is happening, what's happening from demons coming up from the abyss, what's happening with Satan himself in heaven and then on the earth, what's happening with that man, the Antichrist, and this man that comes along as a false prophet. There's so many key aspects to this, and we've studied so much that I think more so than at any point when we talk about what we're talking about tonight and in the few weeks to come, it's God's wrath. It is solely God's wrath being poured out. So the command says go, to do what they're supposed to be doing, which is to pour out these bowls or vials, if your thing calls them vials. I think of a vial of poison or something when the little vial is being poured out. But 7 bowls of God's wrath being poured out. Now, who was the voice? How do we know it was God's voice?
Came from the temple.
All right. Here's interesting, right there. So I'll put Jesus, all right? I don't know. This is God's wrath, but it's assigned to Jesus. He's the judge. He's the thing. So if you want to put God, put God. If you want to put Jesus as Jesus, it's the Godhead. Here's the interesting thing. I gave you parentheses right there. Put 15:8. Chapter 15, verse 8. That's how we can know what this voice is. We've heard a lot of voices. We've heard voices of angels talking to other angels. We've heard voices of commands coming out. We've heard voices of multitudes singing and all kinds of voices and stuff like that. And this, once again, just said, I heard a loud voice. That's not uncommon. But the way we know is because we ended last chapter with the presence of God filling the temple with smoke. And it gives that detail in verse 8 that at that moment in time, in preparation for this final set of judgments, that the temple was filled with the presence and the smoke that came from God, so much so that no one could enter the temple until this was completed. All right, so we know at that point that then when he hears the voice coming from the temple, it's got to be coming from God or from Jesus saying, okay, angels, go. And so the command is given. The wrath is directly from God. The command is coming from God, and the voice to the angels to go do what you're called to do. All right, so that's the command. That's verse 1. We get ready for verse 2. All right. Verse 2 is the first bowl being poured out. I'm going to give one. Okay, Gene, here we go. Gene gets the first bowl. There we go. And you can read that.
The first angel went and poured out his bowl on the land, and ugly and painful sores broke out on the people who had the mark of the beast and worshipped his image.
All right, so that's all you get is one verse to describe this event right here, this bowl being poured out. And I'm going to give you a marker, Gene. I'm going to let you write on there, write something in that bowl. I put up here, I called them boils. If you want to fill in the blank, I wrote plague of sores. Sores. And the first time I spelled sores, I spelled it sours. So then I had to look at it. Let them look right. Plague of sours, those sweet and sour gummies or candies or something like that. The plague of sores. These sores or these boils that are described are horrible. Not only are they individually horrible, but then just the masses of people that are experiencing this as a plague of wrath being poured out on so many people is so incredible. These sores are foul. There's a stench apparently that goes along with them. They're painful and they won't heal. They're relentless. These aren't something that you experience and then they find an antidote or they find a relief or some medicine or you can do this and that helps or something. That's not unthinkable because there are conditions that mankind have experienced with such things that don't go away. And the duration of having to endure something for a long period of time makes not only what you're going through, the actual illness or disease or something, but the duration of it where you just don't get relief from it. Yes, Steve.
Does this, the plague that's just poured out, does this stay with them until death? Or how far does the plague go?
The indication is, from what I understand, is they've got these for the duration. All right. Now we are, again, the sake of a time frame, I can't pinpoint exactly in my mind, but we're halfway through the last half of the tribulation, so we're somewhere around maybe-ish a year and a half to go. So say a year to a year and a half. So this could be a year-long disease or a year-long,
So they don't die as a result of it.
in fact, they wish they could die, yeah. Right. This is something that they are suffering with. It's not something that is designed to kill them, but it's horrible. You have a question?
Yeah, they talked about the timing. I'd like you, for one thing, I'd like you to tell when you think it might be only a year and a half or so left. But the other thing is, or presumably, these chapter 16, so bang, 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 bang. Do you think that it's more likely that it's spread out over a period of time?
Yes. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know, but I would suspect, even though they're given to us in succession without any breaks. We've had so many of the things when we had the trumpets and even the breaking of seals, there were like 4 of them, and then there's this pause. We have things that are clearly the intervals. We have times where the whole picture of the event, it describes some pauses, some events, whether it's the warning of the 3 woes, announcement or something like that, like back in here. We don't have that here. So that would almost say that it's just, yes, it's boom, 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 boom. But there's also no reason to believe that it's just bam, 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 like all in the same day. And so it could be spread out over a period of time. We put it, the reason in our mind and in a drawing like this, we put it this way is because remind ourselves, this is a scroll that's being unrolled, all right? It's a vision that's being given like this. And so we see it on a timeline frame. For that matter, even though you can't double talk. And so they could have said they lined the 7 angels up and they all dumped their bowls out. And then you could come back and say, the bowl that was dumped out from the first angel was this. It seems to be in succession. Does that make sense? So that's part of that is a thing. I think it's a ongoing event that doesn't just happen all at once. What's that? Yeah, where it's happening is worldwide. This is the wrath of God on the remainder of the world that's at that time. And then your other question.
The other question is, why do you think it's delayed? The start of that is delayed instead of starting pretty quickly after the mid-tribulation.
Whoa, because I'm falling backwards. All right. Well, for one, part of this, and it's still part of this is descriptions and these things that are happening right here. When you think about what is taking place at that time, and none of them, we have the pinpoint, it's really clear. Times, time, and half time is really clear. That's a good gauge for us to have it. We know when it kicks off with the 7-year tribulation kicks off with what event? Right. Okay, we're going to have to go back and revisit that, all right? We say rapture. It is after the rapture, but really the 7-year tribulation clock winds and begins happening with the signing of the peace treaty. And we're going to go back and talk about this because I didn't do a good job here, and I'm still studying, and Don won't leave me alone. He keeps challenging me, and I appreciate it. Okay, back to the books, all right? And I'm learning along with you, all right? Think about it. How fast is the rapture? Twinkling of an eye. We know that happens like that. We also know that when that happens, the Antichrist is in position to step into his place of authority, but he's not already there. That's something that happens after the fact, as a result, I believe, of the rapture. I know I'm backing up, is to get where we're down there, all right? But remember that. But actually, when the rapture takes place, there's some time in here as well. And we kind of jump right into that and say, automatically we have the horsemen coming out here. The rise of the white horse is the very first thing that's described after that. But that takes some time as well, stepping into that position, getting things lined up, and the events that happen there. And so it's not given to us to say this was 2 months in duration and that was 7 months later. There are a few of those that we've talked about through there that said this lasted for so long or something, but we don't have many of those. So this is not an exact science. You can't put a clock to this and go every 15 minutes or every 3 months or something like that. Okay? So let me see if I can get back to where we're okay. So we come right over here. When we start to talk about these events as well, it's really hard to pinpoint the duration. Really, everything that's happening here is what takes place the whole time, 3.5 years. So we know the time from here to here is 3.5 years. In whatever things. But what's happening here with the mark of the beast, for instance, and we'll talk about here in a minute as well. But with the mark of the beast that took place here, that doesn't, it's not like Satan was kicked out of heaven, possessed the demon, the man Antichrist, and immediately the next day it's announced you either bow down and worship. No, that's a process that takes place. We're told about it all at one time, but it's a process that takes place. It takes place fairly rapid because everything's in place. That kind of technology, that kind of stuff could be put in place in our time. We can imagine now, like when I started studying this, I couldn't even imagine. I had to think sci-fi kind of stuff. Now it's everyday, use your iPhone, talk to Siri kind of stuff.
Is that where the mark, where they received the mark?
Sometime after the midpoint, because the mark happens after this battle in heaven, after the Antichrist is possessed by the devil, and and the false prophet comes on the scene. As he comes on the scene, he produces this image and gives it power, and now says, bow down and worship that thing, and take this mark. And so all that is a process in here. That takes some time. So we know if it starts right here, we're moving down within, I'm guessing, just put some kind of time frame. We're talking 6 months, down the road. So we're down the road there, and then we have these other things that are happening. We have these angels, we have the things that are happening, the harvest that's taking place. There's no indication of how long that takes place. Is that instantaneous or not? And it's the harvest of the wicked and different things that are going on there. And so these descriptions take some period of time, but we don't know. And so whenever these start, they don't stop. And they do finish up. And the finale is this leading into the Battle of Armageddon. So we know when this takes place and we know when it starts. We don't know exact direction.
The plague of swords
Yes.
for the people that had received.
Yes, okay.
666.
I had a question there. We're going to say who it's for in just a second. Okay, did you have another question, Steve, or not? No, okay. All right, so we had a description of the sores, and it says who was targeted. That's what you're asking, right? So who was targeted?
The mark of the beast.
All right. Did you say believers? Non-believers. Thank you. All right, so I was going to correct you. All right. Not just non-believers. It doesn't just say non-believers. Now, these are going to be non-believers, but it doesn't describe them that way. These are people that are believers in the Antichrist. These are those that have taken the mark and who have bowed down and worshipped the image. So if you fill in your blank, it's those with the mark of the beast. And what are they guilty of? Worshipping the image. All right? And worshipping the image and worshipping the Antichrist or the devil himself, is there much difference? No. It's all worship of him. It's just the same thing. Why would God be so upset that people build idols and worship them, like, Baal or whatever? It's just an image. It's just a false god. Why would he? Because it's still taking the worship that's due him and giving it to something that's dead or man-made, false. He does care about that. And so this worshiping of the image, worshiping Satan, they buy into it, they accept it, which means, what is those that don't? They die, right? So somewhere in this process, before this actually takes place, so between here and here somewhere, the mark of the beast is enacted, the worship is demanded, and if you don't, then you will either immediately or soon, it'll cost you your life. And so we reach a point here where we have this multitude of martyrs that is added, this final group that come out of there that are killed because of that. And we still have the nation of Israel. And where are they?
Hiding.
They're still hiding, all right. They're still in Petra. They're hiding out at this point. Do these swords affect them? Absolutely not. For two big reasons we know of. One, they have a mark, but it's not the mark of the beast, it's the seal of God. So it would not affect them. Even if they were in Jerusalem, it would not be affecting them. Why? Because this is specifically, it's targeted those that have the mark of the beast, either on the forehead or their hands. So 666, it's clear. They've accepted the mark. They've bowed down and worshipped the image, worshipped the devil. Okay? Now we're going to just take a minute and rather just go move to the next bullet. What do you got here? We got the bowl here, and we're gonna remember, here we go, let me see it. Good. He put, oh, we lost it. That bowl spilled out everywhere. Gosh, poured out, all right. Painful sores, all right, so we're gonna remember this. I'll put this up here, good art. We'll put it right up there somewhere, all right? So we have painful sores that have been poured out. But rather than just move to the next one, because that's all we get, let's think about what just took place and put it in perspective to some other things. So I gave you a few more things to think of. First of all, let's think about Revelation 8:7. Someone have that? Revelation 8:7. Okay, what you got, Steve?
For there had been nothing wrong with the first covenant, no place but have been sought for another.
That's not it. Revelation and Revelation.
All right.
That's a good word, though. It's from the Bible, so it's a good word. It's not the word, okay. You got it?
Revelation 8:7.
Yes.
The first angel sounded his trumpet, and there came hell and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled down on the earth. A third of the earth was burned up, a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up.
Okay. Read the next verse.
Shall we go on one?
No, you're right.
The second angel sounded his trumpet.
No, I'm sorry, stop. Okay. You're on a roll too. Okay, no, I'm sorry. Okay. So what this is this is the first trumpet. Okay, I referenced the first trumpet here. Remember, if you remember this discussion, I want to bring it up again and tell you I don't believe it. All right. So, but you got to know this. The more I look at it, the more I study, I think I don't know how anybody can believe it, but plenty of people believe it. All right. Remember that as we're describing these events of these bowls, there are those that combine these and say that the bowls are describing the same things as the trumpets. That it's just a different way of stating the same things. I can't see it. And yet it's in writing. This isn't someone just said, well, I think. There's plenty that try to give evidence for it.
Have the mark of the beast.
Right, so there's all kinds of things that these right here, it gave no description when this trumpet was sounded, a thing, there was no indication of that, all right? But as they described this first trumpet, you have some of the same kind of elements, but they're different, all right? So I'm showing you that both for comparison and for contrast, all right? It's a whole different setting, the trumpets and the bowls, the first bowl compared to the first trumpet. But look at chapter 9, verse 4 and 6. Tia, you got that? Chapter 9, verse 4 and 6.
Okay. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They were not given power to kill them, but only to torture them for 5 months.
Okay. Finish. Sorry.
And the agony they suffered was like that of the sting of a scorpion when it strikes a man.
Okay. It was like a scorpion bite. So that was a different event that took place. But listen to some of the similarities. The similarities is that it had to do with the mark, but it said you can't do this to those who have the mark of God. All right? And so there's a separation then that there's not now. All right? What about the people that have the mark of God?
They don't get affected here.
Well, because they're the nation of Israel that are hid out, as far as we know. We know them for sure. It doesn't affect them. But there's no description of that. It doesn't say, don't do those that have the mark of God. It says, do those that have the mark of the devil. Back here, when it would describe that in chapter 9, did anybody have the mark of the beast?
No.
No, there was no mark of the beast yet. All right, so that didn't happen. It was referring, the only mark was that God did when He sealed 144,000, which is somewhere right over there.
7:1 through 8, where He sealed 144,000.
We're at.
Revelation 7:1 through 8. You got it in green.
I know. There we go. Okay, that's what I'm trying to find it. Point higher, lower, you're getting hot, cold, right there. Okay, so that happened right here. So that event happened after that. Okay. All right, chapter 9. The other reference then is chapter 13. We just studied that a couple weeks ago. Verses 15 through 17. 13, 15 through 17. Who wants that? All right, Gene, you got that.
15 through 17. He was given power to give breath to the images of the first beast so that it could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. He also forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead. You want 17?
Sure, why not?
So that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the first beast of the number of his name.
Okay, so this is a reminder of the enactment of the mark of the beast. Who is the he that he was talking about? He was given power to give life to the image. Who is the he?
And the false prophet.
False prophet. Okay, so we have the false prophet here because it describes that up in verse 11. When he saw this goat with 2 horns and all that kind of stuff, it's described as false prophet. The false prophet sets up the image because he's in charge of religion in the world. And he said, now all these religions that we've kind of brought together under one big umbrella, all that worship of the higher power stuff, all, he says, now goes to this image, which is the image of the beast, which is the Antichrist. So he sets up that image right there, and that's where the mark comes in. So when the second bowl is poured out, all that is a done deal. All right, by this time right here, everyone has had to make their choice. Does that make sense? Okay, so however long this duration is, the first year after the midpoint or something like that, however long it is, because it doesn't happen overnight either. You don't round up everybody on the planet and force this to happen. So it's happened on a scale worldwide. That has to be an image, because when Satan is cast down here, he is confined to the body of that man called the Antichrist. All right? So he can only be in one place at one time. So whereas he can travel the airways before that, he can no longer do that. And so that's why the false prophet would have to make this image that can be cast over, whether that's over TVs, phones, holograms, whatever it is. That's the image. All right? All that is taking place there. So when this plague is poured out, it's clear who these angels are going to. They can clearly see the mark of those that are being targeted. Now, let's just back up one more step and realize there's a lot of these references in the Bible. Exodus chapter 9, verse 8 through 12. That is the 6th plague of Egypt, all right? You're looking for blanks, fill in your blanks. That is the mark of God. Revelation 9, 4 through 6 is the mark of God. Is a reference to the mark of God. That's not for the bowl judgment. That's what had happened in the prior reference, all right? And along with that, the other thing I was going to point out about that description, they said you cannot affect those that have the mark of God on them. But when he described what was happening, he was talking about the same kind of suffering that was relentless, all right? And so that same kind of stuff was happening back then, but this is on a wider scale. All right, you've got, who raised their hand for Exodus 9? Okay, you got it. Exodus 9, 8 through 12.
Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take handfuls of soot from the furnace and have Moses toss it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh. It will become fine dust over the whole land of Egypt, and festering boils will break out on people and animals throughout the land. So they took soot from a furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on all the people and animals. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the bulls that were on them and on all the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord said to Moses.
Okay, so this is similar to happen on a large scale, but in a confined area, to the 6th plague when the nation of Israel was in captivity in Egypt. And the same kind of thing boils down. I thought it was really interesting in that scripture, looking back, that the magicians who were kind of mimicking some of the things that Moses was bringing about that God was bringing about through Moses. And And here it says they couldn't even do that. They were suffering so much themselves, they couldn't even muster up trying to imitate this kind of event that took place. Let me go ahead and, these are just references to those kind. Let me assign the next 5 verses, and then we'll go boom, boom, boom. Who wants the Deuteronomy scripture? All right, Don, you got that. Who wants Job? Chapter 2. All right. Steve, you got that one. Steve's got that one. Luke 16. 9. Okay, you got that. Donnie. Luke 17. Someone over here. Nobody over here is reading. All right, well, you got one that Luke 17 passage. And the last one, Gene, you want that one? Luke 4. 27. Okay? Yeah, 4:27. All right. Now, these are just other times that things kind of like this happen. Deuteronomy 28:27 says,
The Lord will afflict you with the boils of Egypt and the tumors, festering sores, and the itch from which you cannot be cured.
okay, this is a declaration of judgment that was coming on Israel because of some disobedience, and it's kind of a reverse Exodus kind of thing. They came out of Egypt with some of those plagues that were happening, and yet after they were freed from the bondage that they were in, they did things they shouldn't have done. And at that point, God is saying, I'm going to revisit that plague I did on Egypt. I'm going to visit that on you. It was on a small scale for a specific discipline judgment on the nation of Israel for that time. But it is just a reference of God doing that, not to heathen, but to his own people for a reason, okay? Job 2, you remember this one, Job 2, 4 through 10. You know this story, but just again, listen to it, what happened to one man, and think about this on a much broader scale. Who's got the Job reference? All right, you got it, Steve?
Skin for skin, Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life. But now stretch out on your hands and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely touch you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself a bit that he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die. He replied, you are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?
This is a perspective that Job gives us that's quite interesting. What I find fascinating about that event is that Satan goes and he's going to school God on his creation, mankind. He says, God, you just don't get it. You don't even messing with Job. He says, you don't get it. If I've taken his children, I've taken his crops, I've affected him in ways that would devastate most of us, right? And Job was still trusting God through it, in pain and suffering through it, but he was still trusting God. And so Satan said, but God, you just don't understand. Let me attack him personally. Let me threaten his health or his very life. And he'll squeal and he'll give up and he'll turn on you in a heartbeat. All right? Satan thinks he knows man. All right? And Job didn't do it. Even his own wife said, that doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't you do that? Curse God and die. Just get it over with. And he gives us an incredible life lesson. He says, okay, so if God brought this, remember, it wasn't God that brought this on, it was the devil. But he says, we've been blessed by God. Should we only accept the good from God and not the trouble as well? So if this trouble has come upon me, I'm going to just trust God through it. So he did not curse God and die. And the reason I bring that up is because now we're looking at people not like Job. We're looking at people, this is being poured out on those that have the mark of the beast on their forehead or on their hand. And they've paid allegiance to Satan. And that he was trying to say of Job is very true of these people, because they don't know God. And they do squeal, and they would want to have relief from this, but they don't get it. Not only do they not get it, and do they try to spare their life, but they curse God. I gave it away at the very bottom. Those inflicted continue to reject and blaspheme God. Wow. All right. But back in the day with Job, we see an example of someone that has to endure some of this kind of stuff and still trust God for it. All right? Interesting reference. Okay, then we go to the New Testament, Luke chapter 16. Who's got that one? All right, you got it, Donnie?
There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores, and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried in Hades, for he was in torment. He looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me, and sent Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire.
All right. I give you that reference to just have another person's perspective. This is not the parable, I don't believe, like many others. I don't believe it's a parable. It's a story. It gives a name, Lazarus. Not the Lazarus that came out of the tomb, not that Lazarus, but a man named Lazarus, who was a poor beggar. And this poor man was plagued with sores. And this awful description of he was starving and he would just eat the crumbs off of the rich man's table, which he wasn't allowed to do. And even the dogs would come and just lick his sores. It's just an awful, awful picture. But I present that to say, okay, first of all, who directly caused that poor beggar to have sores all over her body? Was that God's wrath, or was it the devil's attack on him? It doesn't say, does it? And does it have to be either? I mean, could he just be a poor beggar that had sores on his? Okay. Now I would say, in the bigger picture, it's the devil's fault because of the starvation things, the plagues, the fall of man, all that kind of stuff. At the same time, you could say, well, God allowed it. So was the beggar the good guy or the bad guy in that true story? He was the good guy. So once again, just like Job, you have something happening with Job. It happened directly from the devil with God's oversight, permission, if you would. Here we don't know. Stuff does just happen. That there's natural consequences. If you're around sickness and you get sickness, it doesn't mean that Satan attacked you or that God is disciplining you. You're around sick people and you got that sickness, all right? So we don't know. Just a reminder. But just this thing that people had to endure this poor beggar had to endure this, and yet he went to be at the bosom of Abraham, the side of Abraham. And the rich man then, who had all the luxuries, suffered and was in torment in hell. Okay, chapter 17, 11 through 14. Who's got that one? All right, one has got that one.
Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going to a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him, and stood at a distance, and called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. When he saw them, he said, Go show yourselves to the priest. And as they went, they were cleansed.
Yes, they were. So that's the case of leprosy. Now, what was this boils, this plague was not identified as leprosy, but leprosy is a horrible thing. Now, leprosy doesn't happen anymore, right? It does. All right. So it's not something that was way back then or something like that. It does actually still happen. Horrible condition. Were these good guys, these 10 lepers, were they the good guys or bad guys? Was this from the devil or was this from God? I don't know. We don't know. True story. It actually happened. It doesn't say. Well, they recognized Jesus and they identified him as someone that could help them because of that, because of their faith, because Jesus had pity on them. He healed them. All right. The point of that is that whose fault or whatever doesn't matter. It was a plague put on 10 people. They were suffering so, and God healed that. Again, I give that reference to remember these these boils are coming from God, and they're coming to bad guys. Now we're all bad, so we're not, we're just saying. But to those that have received the mark. But there's no healing. There's no relief. Those 10 men got relief, but these people will not. And the final reference is kind of an interesting one. Luke 4:27. Jim, you got that one, right?
And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Isaiah the prophet. Yes, Elijah, I'm sorry. Yet not one of them was clean, only Nehemiah the Syrian. Naaman. Okay.
That's all right. Just names we throw out there. We don't know these guys. Okay. All right. That's a reference to 2 Kings chapter 7. Again, just New Testament reference to something that happened in the Old Testament, but those that had leprosy that were not healed. Only a couple of them were healed. The rest endured that for life. What a horrible thing to have to endure, but they did. That, any of those, even the 10 lepers, any of those examples, even what Job went through, I believe, even what that poor beggar went through, I don't believe holds a candlestick. It doesn't hold anything to what's happening here. This is so torturous because this is the direct wrath of God on people that have given that final allegiance to the devil. Even the rich man in that rich man Lazarus story, it didn't say he cursed God, didn't believe in God. He obviously didn't believe in God, but he may have been a decent guy, but he just ended up in hell, so he was not a believer. But these are people that said, God, I curse you and all that, and devil, I worship you. And so I say it's fair to say they get what they deserve, right? All right, let's move on to bowl number 2, verse 3. Chapter 16, verse 3. It's pretty simple one. We can fly through this, and it follows the same kind of pattern. Yes, Steve?
Did you ever give us the deal on Revelation 13 and 15?
It is the power and the actions of the false prophet. Thanks for backing me up on those. I don't always say them, all right? That event that took place in chapter 13 happened by the false prophet. That's when I said, who is the he that was talking about? So that was a false prophet. All right. Now, chapter 16, verse 3. The second bowl is going to be poured out. Who's got it? All right. Wanda's going to do the bowl. The second
Angels of the bowl, now you're giving them one of them.
Oh, that's right. We are the angels up here. We'll go for those. Why don't you go ahead? Verse 3.
Leave him alone. The master said to himself, what shall I do now? My master has taken away my job. I am not strong. Where are you?
No, you're not.
Chapter 16, verse 3. All right. I'm going to fire that angel and come back to my angel table right here. I know, angel. Good angel's hard to find. She's a stand-in. All right, try it again, Wanda. We'll give you one more chance. All right, and then you've got the bowl there, so you got to do like Gene and write something in it. So, what does it say? Verse 3.
The second angel poured out the bowl on the sea, and it turned into blood, like that of a dead man. Every living thing in the sea died.
All right. So the event. So if you want to write anything, fill in the blank. The second bowl is the sea becomes blood. All right. Now it does say like blood, but really the description here is we'll just take it for what it's worth and just say it's blood. So it turns to blood. What is the result?
Everything died.
Think about it. Everything in the sea dies. Yeah, stink. Yeah. Hal's already holding his nose. You won't have to hold your nose because you won't be around, all right? Yeah, talk about dead fish. Listen to this description. This comes out of one of the books I study, I think. But it says this. Seawater, okay? Hope I got to get my illustration here. I did this thing all the way over here, all right? My whole world fell apart today. Because literally I dropped it and fell off of its stand. So the world fell apart, all right? Look at that globe, all right? And think about the amount of water that is on the planet. I know you've heard these numbers before, but seawater, ocean water, covers 70.8% of the exterior surface of the planet. 70% of the planet is covered, the surface is covered by water. To an average depth of 12,500 feet. The maximum depth, 35,800 feet. Think of that in terms of blood that kills everything. It's hard to visualize the billions of floating, rotting, dead and dying sea creatures. The awful, unbelievable stench that Hal was just thinking about, as well as the harbinger of disease. Think of not only the smell and the sight and the horrific thing that's happening, but the disease that would come from that. Right here, just the bowl. Now again, what's that? Well, this is on the sea. This is the sea life. All right, this is the creatures of the sea. So then the boils continue on, and now the sea is attacked. All right. The first thing is on the men and women, the people with the mark of the beast. This has an effect to those people. The people that are dealing with the boils now have to deal with the stench and with the thing. You may say, oh, but I live far away from that. Can't even imagine. Peter and Paul Lalonde describe it this way. The writers of the Left Behind series, some of them, they say, we think about diseases even in our lifetime right now. Diseases like tuberculosis, once thought to have been totally eradicated, are now resurfacing. Other strange new diseases are also appearing. There's I've heard this on the news, Streptococcus A, the flesh-eating virus, and there are also Ebola outbreaks in SARS. Doctors are now finding themselves at a loss at the battle for as they battle microbes that are being immune to all the antibiotics that we have. World travel, changes of sexual habits, increasing numbers of refugees have made it possible for many of these diseases to become pandemic, rapidly spreading across the entire planet almost overnight. And if you've watched any of those shows that seem a little far-fetched, you realize it really could happen. Even apart from the direct hand of God, this could really happen on our planet, and how horrible that would be. It's not if it happens, but when it happens. And it is going to happen right here with these plagues that are coming here. So it's pretty frightening stuff, all right? Now, what does that kind of look and sound like on a smaller scale? Again, just like we looked at the first bowl, Revelation chapter 8 again, verse 8 and 9 is the second trumpet. The second, well, yeah, before we go to the Exodus thing, but the second trumpet right here, someone read that one. 8 and 9, chapter 8, Revelation 8, 8 and 9. You got it, okay? Janelle?
The second angel sounded his trumpet, and something like a huge mountain, all ablaze, was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea turned into blood, a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed.
All right, now you see a little resemblance. So you can start to see, okay, I can see why someone's saying the same thing. You got second bowl, second trumpet. This is an attack on the sea, this is an attack on the sea. But big differences. What are some of the big differences you heard?
Only a third.
Here, only a third.
Yeah, everything.
Clearly different. Here, everything dies. All right? Here, what causes it?
Fire.
This fire, this thing that happens, so it could be a meteor, could be a whatever, asteroid meteor, whatever. It's still part of all this stuff, but it just happens during this time, almost like a warning. Here, it's directly the wrath of God. Someone raise their hand. Yes, Andrew.
There's a big difference in the tone set from the ones that are before to the ones at the end. The ones at the end are like, okay, I'm done with you.
Yeah.
You've already made your choice.
That's right.
Here's what you get.
Yes.
This is what you chose.
And trumpets are some sound of at least a heads up. This is happening. This is a warning. Whereas this is poured out, it's a done deal. I did still in the reading, I still hear a little bit of them saying, God is still trying to get people to repent. Just no evidence that it's happened. For one, these people that are getting the boils, they can't repent. You can't take the mark of the beast and then say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I repent. I believe in you, God. No, too late, all right? One, did you give me a bowl? Here we go. Let's see what you did here.
Read it, I can write on it.
It says, oh, sorry. It says, eat more Captain Crunch. No, we got blood, all right? Everything dies. You did good. Blood and everything dies. I'll put that artwork up there as well, all right? This also does remind us, real quick before we go, this also reminds us of Exodus chapter 7, verse 14 through 21. Someone just describe what happened in that plague in Egypt. All right, so Moses set his staff in there, and the Nile River turned into blood. All right, was that a pretty scene? No. That was a devastating thing, at least on a small scale for them there in Egypt. So again, but that is so small when you compare that to what takes place right here. And once again, that was a warning. That was just to get them to wake up and let go, let my people go. This is not a warning. This is a wrath. This is a judgment. Now, we'll end there for today. And see, I'll have plenty of time for questions. You've got 30 seconds for questions. Go. No time for questions. You got only did 3 verses. Yes, Kathy has a question.
killed.
Yes.
So those people, are they, what are they?
Yes. Well, okay, that's a good question. I'm glad you said it that way because it made me stop before I answer. You're not saved by not taking the mark of the beast. All right, that doesn't make you saved. You have to be saved during this time. You have to be saved like anybody else is saved. You have to say, I believe in God, I believe in Christ, and I have to ask to be saved. There could be reasons why people just don't buy into the mark. They don't buy into God either and are killed or whatever, that aren't saved, that don't end up with the mark of the beast and that are killed. So not everybody that dies in this time are automatic martyrs, no. But if you don't take the mark of the beast because you refuse to do that and you accept God, then you're ushered to the throne to be a part of that group that are martyrs out of that. Good question, though. All right, so but you have to pay the price for it, exactly. Anything else? What I gave you at the very end is just a teaser, all right? I started to get it all. Okay, so what's to come? Bowl 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 with a lot of artwork, okay? So we'll pick up and do a couple more verses next Sunday night, okay? Any last questions before we go? Y'all remember to pray for our Falls Creek crew this week? All right. Those of y'all that are here Wednesday night, come for business meeting, and we'll have a good time. Nothing for the youth on Wednesday night. The children, I think we're all together, so, all right. Just get so out of breath. You guys did. Janelle, would you dismiss us on that? All right. I did. I started, yeah, get you off that phone. Unless you're calling someone in the middle of a conversation. All right, let's bring you dismissed, all right?
Father, thank you so much for the privilege of meeting with you, worshiping, learning your word. Lord, thank you so much for time. Thank you for time and everything you this day. And Lord, I just pray that we will take this to heart. And there's people that we know, family that we know, friends that we know, that we know. We need to be talking to them, we need to be saying, we go to Jesus. Forgive us what we do that's wrong in your sight, or how we fail to do things that we just don't do what we should do. Be with the sick church and the people